Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues with an interview with Mr. George Ferriter, Democrat, and town of Doylestown?
The village of Doylestown.
Village of Doylestown. Thanks for the correction. He's running in the 42nd Assembly District. Mr. Ferriter, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you.
Programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Mr. Ferriter, this is your first interview with Wisconsin Eye. Give us the short version of your background.
Sure. I'm 62 years old. I currently serve as the village president in the village of Doylestown. I'm a retired mechanical engineer, and I'm also a military veteran with 8 years active service and 18 years Guard and Reserve service, where I finished out in the Wisconsin Air National Guard.
Thank you. You say on your website, and I'm quoting it here, you want to begin repairing the damage done by 3 years of greed-driven vandalism.
Sure.
Explain that, please.
I understand that's pretty harsh language, but I believe that it's appropriate. Wisconsin is a place with a heritage of creating public policy for the public good. And what we've seen over the past 3 years is the creation of policy that, at least in many cases, is for the benefit of private interests and special interests. And that's been to the detriment of public good.
Who have been the winners under that system of greed-driven vandalism?
Well, I think that we see an outstanding example in Geobic Taconite, the mining company that's interested in opening up a large iron ore mine in the northern part of the state. There are, of course, other examples. Most recently in the news was the Ashley Furniture Company, which was given some benefit by the WEDC.
Okay. Let's go back to Geobic Taconite. There was a weekend disclosure that the company gave $700,000 to Republicans trying to keep their jobs. But here's my question. What would you do to the law that was passed early last session that allowed them to seek that permit?
Sure. I think we need to revisit the bipartisan alternative law that was offered up concurrent with the offering up of what became Assembly Bill number 1. There are alternatives that would be less harmful to the environment and certainly safer in the long run to the state of Wisconsin.
As a local official, what's been the impact of Act 10 on your community, sir?
Sure. I'd like to expand that a little bit and talk about the budget repair bill in general.
Please.
In early 2011, I had the opportunity to run as village president. And with my background as an engineer and as a project manager, I knew that I had skills and abilities that could help the village endure what looked to be a fairly challenging budgetary constraint coming down. And I believe that we were successful. The reduction in general aids and transportation aids that were concurrent with the budget repair bill affected our village, as it did most every other village and township in the state. So we've been dealing with that for the past few years, and successfully, I believe.
Okay. Let's talk about public schools. Let's get into it this way. If you're a member of the Assembly, what are you going to push for in terms of funding for K-12 in the next budget cycle?
Sure. We really need to revisit the school funding formula. There's a number of aspects to this that could and should be put in place. We need a secure, sustainable flow of funds to our public schools. This can be done by adjustments to the funding formula, as well as a renewal of our commitment as a state to ensuring that a state level of funding is consistent. The $3,000 per student base funding offered by the Department of Public Instruction, I believe, is a start. As a goal, we should have a return to the 2/3 state funding that was our state program some number of years ago. and ensuring that the categorical aids to schools, sparsity aids, special aids necessary to ensure particularly that our rural schools that otherwise might be underfunded are taken care of. We need to be aware that our local public schools are central to our Wisconsin communities and are central to our Wisconsin society, and that's important to us.
Are you willing to consider a tax increase to go back to that 2/3 guarantee that you're absolutely right, we don't pay anymore?
Right. I don't believe tax increases are necessary.
Okay.
We can be prudent and we can be scientific in our approach to how we use our revenue streams. That would allow us to better fund our schools without tax increases.
A big part of the debate over the state budget next year is going to be over vouchers and school choice.
Right.
What do you think should happen with that program, sir?
The voucher school program is an example of policy that's created possibly for the private good, certainly in some cases for the private good. We need to be very careful with such programs, and I would strongly recommend that we freeze the voucher school cap and reassess the voucher school program overall, certainly not expand it. Dollars that are expended on school vouchers are directly taken away from our public school program, and we have a constitutional obligation in the state of Wisconsin to provide free public education of uniform quality to all of our students, and underscore public.
And my final question on schools is your feelings about Governor Walker's call that the Assembly and Senate withdraw from the Common Core standards, sir?
No, I have to regard that as something of a political stunt. The Common Core standards are academic standards. As such, we need to look at them carefully and incorporate what's useful. National standards are not a bad idea. In order to judge our school system against the nation's other schools, a common standard certainly is useful.
The Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance says one of the biggest problems for the next session is going to be transportation funding.
Sure.
They say that if you continue to fund transportation at the 2013 levels for 10 years, transportation programs are going to be $2 billion short. Do you think there's a deficit? If so, how should it be fixed, sir?
Right. Transportation funding is absolutely critical. As a village president, I live with the impacts of insufficient transportation funding every day in terms of road maintenance. And I know that extends across the entire state. Every village, every township, every county is suffering with regards to maintaining our roads. We can avoid a deficit. We've just gone through a cycle wherein a large apparent surplus was identified. That money was returned to the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. It might have been wiser to take a large portion of that and replenish the transportation fund. I believe that our transportation committee within the Assembly should have been beating on the Assembly leader's desk and demanding that some of that funding go directly back into transportation.
Would you consider either raising the gas tax or the $75 to register our vehicles?
Sure. We had a Blue Ribbon Commission a year or so ago that came up with a variety of funding alternatives. We need to look at that as a menu, if you will. Okay. Certainly fee-based approaches to funding the deficit or the potential deficit need to be considered. Whether or not it's tollways, increasing usage fees, mileage fees, each of those need to be carefully considered.
One question on health care. As you know, 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents gets their health care from our Medicaid program.
Sure.
Yet the American Hospital Association says our reimbursement rates for Medicaid are the second lowest in the nation. Have you studied that issue? Do you think they should be increased?
I have. I've looked at that, and recognizing that our hospitals, particularly our local hospitals, are also essential to our communities, passing along a disproportionate share of the difference between Medicaid reimbursement and actual costs is unfair to those hospitals. In the previous legislative cycle, there were funds directed to the hospitals. That program should be renewed and perhaps expanded. In addition, the state's acceptance of Medicaid expansion almost certainly would help this problem, as funds would be freed up to direct towards the hospital.
So you think the state should take the federal government up on its offer to pay all costs to expand Medicaid for a few years?
Absolutely correct. We know that there's a guarantee of 100% reimbursement by the state if we take up that mantle. We know that the Legislative Fiscal Bureau has now analyzed these flows of money, and we need to recognize as Wisconsin citizens that we made a mistake in not accepting those funds initially, and let's correct that.
There will be a bill introduced on to legalize the medical use of marijuana. Traveling with that, of course, is whether the recreational use of marijuana, the Colorado, state of Washington models.
Sure.
Your positions on those issues?
They're two very distinct issues. Medical use of marijuana, certainly marijuana or its derivatives as a medication prescribed by a doctor for a legitimate medical condition should be allowed. I think we know that there are many cases of patients in advanced cancer, for example, that could benefit from that. That's completely distinct from recreational use. Now, as a state, we have a couple of models to look at, Colorado and Washington State, where they have liberalized the approach to recreational marijuana use. They should be carefully considered before we expand any laws to embrace recreational use. Certainly, the possibility of marijuana being a gateway drug is a challenge and needs to be fully understood.
Going back to your website, 3 years of greed-driven vandalism, and you cite two examples, Gogebic and the Ashley Furniture, which the subject of recent news stories. Do we need tougher ethics laws? Do you think laws were broken there?
I don't believe laws were broken, but ethical standards need to be maintained at a very high level. Wisconsin has a wonderful tradition of clean government, but in the past few years we've seen a pay-to-play mentality that seems to be becoming increasingly pervasive. And if legislation is required to push that back, by all means, that's the avenue that we should go.
It was an issue in the primary for Attorney General, so I'm asking candidates, because it's always an issue in the Capitol. First offense, drunken driving. Do you think it should be a crime?
Sure. I would say on principle, no. It needs to be considered on a case basis. Certainly, driving while under the influence of an impairing substance, whether it be alcohol or drugs, needs to be seriously considered by our legal system. Multiple infractions of those laws, we should be very strict. But for an initial infraction, we need to look at that on a case basis. It's unfortunate if we burden an individual with a criminal charge who probably would not really deserve that.
As a first-time candidate, I've asked you about a lot of issues, but is there any issue central to your campaign that I haven't asked about, sir, that you want to bring out?
Sure. Well, principally we run on education, transportation, local roads, local control, which is important as a village leader. I wish to have my ability to protect the citizens by virtue of deploying policy in order to ensure that everybody remains safe, and environmental concerns. We live in a time when the environment is in continuous peril. We have pipeline projects, we have transmission line projects, we have agricultural activities which need to be controlled in some way. Now, I'm a strong advocate of agriculture. I understand its importance in our Wisconsin heritage and its importance in our economy. However, agricultural practice as it pertains to the larger environment and the safety and well-being of the community needs to be evaluated.
And then finally, I want to give you a chance to highlight any specific differences between you and your opponent on November 4, Representative Ripp.
Sure. I believe the differences are pretty stark. My opponent has been a loyal adherent to the policies of the current administration. He has voted consistently with his party caucus on every controversial issue, including many that we've touched on here that have not been to the benefit of the citizens of Wisconsin. I will promise to work night and day for the benefit of the middle class, for the benefit of our environment, and for the benefit of the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you. George Ferriter of Doylestown is a Democratic candidate in the 42nd Assembly District. The election is November 4. Mr. Ferriter, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.